That was Michael Anthony, okay? 100% dedicated, never did anything to hurt those guys, and they tried to hurt him again and again and again.
Behind Van Halen's explosive riffs, wild stage antics, and headline-making feuds, one man held it all together. Quietly, powerfully, and with more sacrifice than fans ever knew. But Michael Anthony's journey wasn't just about bass lines and backing vocals. It was about loyalty tested, credits lost, and a betrayal discovered not with a phone call, but on the internet. In this untold chapter of rock history, you'll learn how Anthony's story wasn't just a foundation beneath Van Halen's sound, but a narrative of passion, pain, and perseverance that might completely rewrite your view of the band. Michael Anthony's low-end rhythm carried Van Halen, even when the spotlight never turned his way. One particular moment would eventually change everything, and it didn't happen on stage. Anthony's musical roots were deeply shaped by his family, especially his father, Walter Sobolewski, who played the trumpet. Growing up hearing his father practice and perform left a powerful impression on young Michael, laying the foundation for his growing curiosity about instruments and live performance. Following in his father's footsteps, he began playing the trumpet during childhood and stayed involved in school music programs. After moving to Southern California in the mid-1960s, he attended Dana Junior High in Arcadia and joined the school's marching band, further developing his musical talent and learning the discipline of group performance. Though he had a strong connection to the trumpet, Anthony gradually shifted toward rock music around age 13. Unlike many of his peers who picked up the guitar or drums, he wanted to be different and chose the bass guitar. A friend, Mike Hershey, lent him a Fender Mustang guitar, which Anthony modified into a bass by removing 2 strings. That experiment marked a pivotal moment in his musical journey, and soon after, his father recognized his dedication and bought him a proper Fender Precision bass along with a Gibson amplifier. Anthony admired iconic bassists like Jack Bruce of Cream, John Paul Jones of Led Zeppelin, and Harvey Brooks of Electric Flag. Though left-handed, he trained himself to play right-handed, showing flexibility and adaptability early on. His consistent practice, musical ear, and strong technical foundation would become critical during the Van Halen era. As Anthony's skills sharpened, fate was about to tune the strings of destiny. In the early 1970s, he dove into the Southern California music scene and joined various local bands before settling into a group called Snake. This power trio blended hard rock with blues and saw Anthony take on both bass and lead vocal duties. Snake played covers and original songs, performing at school dances, festivals, and local clubs across the Pasadena and Arcadia areas. These performances helped Anthony hone his skills on stage and solidified his ambition to pursue music professionally. During this time, the local music scene in the San Gabriel Valley became a crucial networking ground. Snake eventually crossed paths with another up-and-coming band, Mammoth, which featured brothers Eddie and Alex Van Halen. The 2 bands often played the same venues, and on one occasion, Snake opened for Mammoth at Pasadena High School. That night, Mammoth's PA system failed, and Anthony generously offered Snake's equipment so the show could go on. The gesture impressed the Van Halen brothers and planted the seed for a future collaboration. Not long after, Mammoth faced a turning point. Their bassist, Mark Stone, had departed, leaving an open spot. Remembering Anthony from earlier gigs, the Van Halen brothers invited him to a jam session to test musical chemistry. The session, reportedly held in a garage, ended up proving exactly what they hoped. Anthony's energetic bass playing and powerful backing vocals were the missing puzzle pieces. His rhythm locked in tightly with the band's sound, and his harmonies added a new depth to their performances. Impressed with the synergy, the Van Halen brothers quickly inducted Anthony as their new bassist. Soon afterward, the band made a defining change. They dropped the name Mammoth after discovering another band already used it and adopted the name Van Halen, a move that emphasized the brothers' identity while signaling a new era. With David Lee Roth on vocals, Eddie on guitar, Alex on drums, and Michael Anthony on bass, the classic lineup of Van Halen was complete. This formation marked the beginning of one of the most iconic rock bands of the 20th century. For Anthony, joining Van Halen was far more than a simple lineup change. It was a launch into a global career that would transform his life. As Van Halen's popularity exploded in the late 1970s and 1980s, Anthony remained a constant in the background. His bass line steady, his backing vocals vital, but his spotlight dim compared to the flamboyant energy of Roth and the guitar wizardry of Eddie. Behind the scenes, tensions and power struggles slowly began to surface, shaping the band's dynamics in ways fans couldn't see. The classic lineup was now in place. But as time went on, the brotherhood would be tested in ways no one could have predicted. Band dynamics. Michael Anthony quickly proved himself to be a vital part of Van Halen's musical identity. As the band began performing across the Los Angeles club circuit, particularly at iconic venues like Gazzarri's and the Whiskey A Go Go, Anthony's onstage energy and vocal harmony stood out. His high-pitched backing vocals became a signature part of the Van Halen sound, providing a sharp contrast to David Lee Roth's lead vocals and helping to define the band's vocal style in a crowded rock landscape. In addition to his vocal work, Anthony's tight, no-frills bass playing anchored Eddie Van Halen's explosive guitar solos and Alex Van Halen's thunderous drumming, giving the band precision it needed without sacrificing its raw energy. When Van Halen released their debut album in 1978 under Warner Brothers Records, Anthony's musical contributions were undeniable. His bass lines provided a steady rhythmic foundation on tracks like Runnin' with the Devil and Ain't Talkin' About Love, while his background vocals elevated anthems like Jamie's Cryin' and Feel Your Love Tonight. The album was a commercial breakthrough, and Anthony's harmonies were widely praised for their blend of power and melody. As the band's fame skyrocketed and they began touring heavily in support of their albums, Anthony remained consistent presence, both musically and personally. He earned a reputation for being dependable and low maintenance, especially compared to the often volatile dynamics among the other members. Initially, Anthony was treated as a full-fledged member of the band, receiving his fair share of profits and expenses. This included revenue from album sales, tours, and merchandise. According to ex-manager Noel Monk, Anthony was responsible for 20% of the band's debts and revenues and participated in band business decisions during the early years. However, as Van Halen's popularity surged and internal struggles for power developed, the financial arrangements began to tilt in favor of the Van Halen brothers and Roth. This shift began to significantly impact Anthony's share of income and ownership rights. Still, through it all, Anthony's loyalty remained rooted in the music and the progress of the group. He continued to contribute to Van Halen's rise during the late 1970s and early 1980s, as the band released a series of multi-platinum albums that kept them touring and recording nonstop. Even as tensions grew between other members, Anthony's playing stayed steady and professional. By the time albums like Fair Warning and Diver Down were released, Anthony had cemented his role as the foundation of the band's rhythm section. His vocal support remained a critical component of Van Halen's live shows and studio recordings. While Eddie dazzled audiences with his guitar pyrotechnics and Roth commanded attention with his stage presence, both fans and critics began to recognize that Anthony was one of the most important and underappreciated pillars holding together the musical cohesion of one of rock's most explosive acts. Underscore. The 1984 contract controversy. By 1984, Van Halen had become one of the most commercially successful and influential rock bands in the world. The release of their album 1984 marked a career high point, featuring massive hits like Jump Panama and Hot for Teacher. However, behind the scenes, the band was reaching a boiling point. Despite being a founding member and a significant contributor to Van Halen's signature vocal sound, Michael Anthony was being increasingly pushed out of key decisions. According to former manager Noel Monk, a major shift occurred during the 1984 tour that forever changed Anthony's financial and legal relationship with the band. Monk revealed in his memoir Runnin' with the Devil that Anthony was pressured by Eddie and Alex Van Halen, along with David Lee Roth, into signing away all of his future songwriting credits and royalties. The circumstances were murky and aggressive. Monk claimed that Anthony was presented with the paperwork backstage just hours before his show, with all three of his bandmates hovering over him as he signed. The contract was retroactive, meaning Anthony also forfeited credit and revenue from the 1984 album itself. despite having contributed both musically and vocally. This moment marked a major power shift within Van Halen. Anthony had effectively been demoted from equal partner to contracted performer, losing all stake in the band's intellectual property. Monk said that had he known about the contract beforehand, he would have advised Anthony not to sign. But Anthony, always the peacekeeper, went through with it, reportedly to avoid confrontation or jeopardizing the tour. The consequences were devastating. By signing away his rights, Anthony forfeited millions in potential earnings from licensing deals, greatest hits compilations, and future reissues of albums he had helped create. 1984 alone went on to sell over 10 million copies in the U.S. and remains one of Van Halen's most profitable records. Yet Anthony would never see a share of the songwriting royalties from that success, despite his clear and audible contributions. Though the financial blow was severe, the damage to Anthony's legacy as a founding member was even greater. He remained in the band for several more years, continuing to tour and record, but his reduced status made him increasingly vulnerable in future disputes and lineup changes. Still, he kept his frustrations to himself. For years, Anthony never publicly criticized his bandmates or spoke about the injustice of the 1984 contract. He maintained a professionalism, choosing to focus on the music and the fans. Eventually, Anthony did begin to speak about the incident during interviews and fan Q&As. He confirmed that he had, in fact, signed away his rights under duress and expressed regret over how the situation unfolded. Still, he emphasized that at the time his priority was preserving the band, his loyalty to Van Halen, and his love for playing music outweighed everything else. The 1984 contract controversy has since become one of the most glaring examples in rock history of how power struggles can strip a principal contributor of both credit and compensation. And in Michael Anthony's case, it revealed a tragic side of success, one where loyalty and talent weren't always rewarded with fairness. Eddie's criticism. In the years following Van Halen's commercial peak, Michael Anthony began to experience a noticeable shift in how his contributions to the band were recognized, particularly from Eddie Van Halen himself. Although Anthony had been an essential part of the band's sound since its inception, Eddie began downplaying his role in interviews, often implying that Anthony lacked the musical skills expected of a professional bassist. One of the most controversial moments came in a 2015 interview with Billboard, where Eddie claimed he had to teach Anthony how to play every note and accused him of lacking initiative. The comment sparked immediate backlash from fans and fellow musicians, many of whom believed the statements were both unfair and historically inaccurate. Eddie's remarks clashed with the respect Anthony had long earned for delivering tight bass lines and signature high harmony vocals during live shows and recordings. In response, Anthony firmly rejected Eddie's claims in later interviews, stating they were entirely unfounded. He insisted he always learned the band's material on his own and that there were no sessions where Eddie had to teach him how to play. If such sessions had occurred, Anthony argued, they would have been documented. Yet no such evidence existed, reinforcing the idea that Eddie's statements were exaggerated or even fabricated. The criticism was more than just a professional insult. It hit Anthony on a deeply personal level. In retrospective interviews, he shared how hurtful it was to hear such comments from someone he had known for decades and once considered close friend and collaborator. He described the experience as emotionally draining, especially because he had always tried to maintain harmony within the group during turbulent times. Publicly, Eddie's words cast a temporary shadow over Anthony's reputation, prompting some newer fans to question his talent. Despite his decades of well-regarded performances and praise from fellow musicians, Anthony chose not to stir up public drama, but he admitted the growing distance between him and Eddie contributed to the slow unraveling of their relationship. By the mid-2000s, communication between them had almost completely ceased, and Anthony was quietly pushed out of the band's core operations. After Eddie's death in 2020, Anthony expressed regret that they never had a chance to mend their relationship. Despite the harsh words exchanged in the media, he had always hoped for reconciliation and closure. Unfortunately, that chance never came. The divide between the two stands as a poignant example how even legendary partnerships can be undone by ego, miscommunication, and unresolved conflict. Behind the scenes, the tension led to more than just hurt feelings. It initiated a quiet erasure of Anthony's presence in the band. The decline. By the late 1990s, Michael Anthony's presence in Van Halen had begun to fade, not abruptly, but in subtle, meaningful ways. During the recording of their 1998 album Van Halen 3, Anthony only played bass on 3 of the 11 tracks. Eddie Van Halen handled bass duties on the rest, signaling a major shift in the band's internal dynamic. Though Anthony still appeared in promotional material and toured with the band after the album's release, his reduced participation in the studio raised questions among fans and insiders about his role. It marked a turning point. Anthony's once central presence was now being gradually diminished both musically and operationally. As the band moved into the 2000s, his visibility continued to decline. Despite being part of early reunion talks and participating in some interviews and rehearsals, his actual contributions to recordings remained minimal. When Van Halen released the 2004 compilation The Best of Both Worlds, Anthony didn't perform on any of the 3 new tracks. He only contributed backing vocals. These omissions fueled perception that he was being phased out, especially as the Van Halen brothers asserted more control over both the music and the business side of the band. The 2004 reunion tour with Sammy Hagar marked Anthony's final tour with Van Halen, but even this came with complications. According to Hagar, Anthony had to agree to reduce financial compensation and sign a contract that treated him more like a hired musician than a full-fledged band member in order to participate. Though the tour was hugely successful, it failed to heal the emotional wounds that had been accumulating for years. Anthony later stated that while he tried to remain professional and move forward, it was becoming increasingly clear that the band no longer saw him as a vital part of its future. In fact, behind the scenes, steps were already being taken to replace him, something Anthony wouldn't fully realize until later. In 2006, Eddie Van Halen announced that his teenage son, Wolfgang Van Halen, would replace Anthony on bass. This news didn't come directly to Anthony. Instead, he discovered it through online speculation and rumors among fans. In interviews years later, Anthony revealed he was blindsided and deeply hurt. What stung the most wasn't just a replacement. It was that after decades of loyalty and contributions to the band's legacy, he never even received a phone call. The silence was deafening. Emotionally, Anthony was devastated. He had helped build Van Halen from the ground up, only to be quietly erased from the picture without acknowledgement. The deterioration of his relationship with Eddie and Alex Van Halen didn't lead to a clear decision or confrontation. It simply marked the end. Not with a bang, but with a quiet, painful erasure. Sammy Hagar collaborations. Following his departure from Van Halen, Michael Anthony rekindled his friendship and musical chemistry with former Van Halen frontman Sammy Hagar. Their bond, forged during the band's Van Hagar era, laid the groundwork for several successful collaborations. One of their earliest projects was The Other Half, a touring act launched in 2005. The group featured Anthony and Hagar performing Van Halen classics from both the David Lee Roth and Hagar eras, and fans warmly embraced it as a spirited continuation of the band's legacy. The name The Other Half was a tongue-in-cheek reference to their status as the often overlooked halves of Van Halen, and their energetic live shows paid tribute to the music that defined an era. Even earlier, in 2002, Anthony and Hagar had joined forces for a short-lived but ambitious supergroup called Planet Us, alongside guitar virtuoso Joe Satriani, drummer Dean Castronovo, and at one point, Journey's Neil Schon. Although they never released a full album or toured extensively, the group recorded tracks like Psycho Vertigo and Peephole, later featured on Hagar's 2008 solo album Cosmic Universal Fashion. The project showcased Anthony's continued relevance and adaptability within the rock world, far beyond the shadow of Van Halen. The most commercially and critically successful of Anthony's post-Van Halen ventures came in 2008 with the formation of Chickenfoot, reuniting him with Hagar and bringing in Satriani and Red Hot Chili Peppers drummer Chad Smith. The band's self-titled debut album, released in 2009, was both a critical and commercial hit, debuting in the top 10 on the Billboard 200. Their chemistry and musicianship were widely praised, with Anthony's bass lines and signature harmonies remaining crucial to their sound. Their second album, Chickenfoot 3, 2011, further solidified the band as more than just a side project, proving Anthony still had plenty of creative energy and musical relevance. In 2014, Anthony and Hagar teamed up once again to form Sammy Hagar and the Circle, joined by guitarist Vic Johnson and drummer Jason Bonham, son of Led Zeppelin legend John Bonham. The Circle offer a mix of Van Halen, Led Zeppelin, Montrose, and Hagar solo hits, delivering an exciting and nostalgic live experience for fans. They also release original material, including the 2019 album Space Between, which reached number 4 on the Billboard 200, further cementing their place in modern rock. These collaborations made it clear that Michael Anthony's passion for music never faded. His talent and legacy extended far beyond his Van Halen years, showing his enduring commitment to the craft and his fans. Sure, here's your full text turned into clean, well-structured paragraphs while preserving the emotional and narrative tone. Valerie Bertinelli's biopic opposition. Valerie Bertinelli, the actress and ex-wife of Eddie Van Halen, has publicly expressed her strong opposition to any biopic about the legendary guitarist or the band Van Halen, at least during her lifetime. In a 2023 interview, Bertinelli revealed that she had explicitly told her son, Wolfgang Van Halen, to make sure I'm dead before allowing such a film to happen. Her reasoning stems from a deep desire to protect the integrity of Eddie's memory and to avoid any dramatized version of his complex life. She voiced concerns that Hollywood might distort key aspects of Eddie's personality, his musical journey, and his struggles with addiction, turning them into mere entertainment rather than honoring the truth of who he was. Bertinelli's resistance is rooted in her deeply personal experiences. Married to Eddie from 1981 to 2007 and sharing a son with him, she witnessed firsthand the highs and lows of his life. She has often spoken candidly about their difficult moments, especially Eddie's battle with substance abuse and the toll it took on their relationship and family. For Valerie, the idea of seeing those intimate, painful memories fictionalized on screen, even under guise of artistic tribute, would be emotionally overwhelming. She did, perhaps jokingly, mention that if a film were ever made, Selena Gomez could play her. However, she quickly added that she hoped the singer would decline if ever approached. A major part of the family's protectiveness now lies under the umbrella of Wolfgang Van Halen's career. As a musician forging his own path while carrying the weight of his father's legacy, Wolfgang has repeatedly addressed the pressure of constant comparisons. He has also criticized those who try to exploit Eddie's name for personal gain. Wolfgang has made it clear that he believes the best way to honor his father is through music, not through dramatized films or public spectacles. This echoes his mother's stance and reinforces the family's united commitment to preserving Eddie Van Halen's dignity and legacy. Valerie's opposition isn't just about mistrust of Hollywood. It's about raw emotion and unresolved grief. The Van Halen family is still healing from Eddie's death in 2020. As she has expressed, the loss is still very recent, and a biopic risks reopening emotional wounds that haven't yet begun to fully heal. For Valerie, Eddie's story can't be compressed into a 2-hour dramatization. The complexities of their shared history, their private struggles, and Eddie's artistry deserve something more honest and personal. While Valerie stands guard over the past, her son Wolfgang is carefully shaping what the future might look like. Legacy and modern perspectives. Wolfgang Van Halen. Wolfgang Van Halen, the only son of Eddie Van Halen, has become one of the most influential voices in defining his father's legacy in the modern era. Through interviews and social media, Wolfgang has criticized what he views as toxic fan culture, particularly those who use nostalgia to demand return to the classic Van Halen lineup. He has expressed deep frustration with people who ignore the emotional complexity of the band's history, especially after Eddie's passing. Instead of romanticizing the idea of a reunion or tribute tour, Wolfgang advocates for authenticity and respect in honoring his father's memory, not shallow fan service. Beyond his public comments, Wolfgang has also confirmed the existence of a vast archive of unreleased Van Halen recordings. This has sparked widespread speculation about potential posthumous releases. Guitarist Steve Lukather, a close friend of Eddie's and a member of Toto, revealed in 2023 that he and Alex Van Halen had explored Eddie's vault of music. Lukather noted there may be enough material for future projects, but he also emphasized that any releases would only happen with the full blessing of the Van Halen family. Fans are understandably excited about the possibility of hearing new material from Eddie, But Wolfgang has urged caution. He has repeatedly said that there are no current plans for a new Van Halen album or tour, firmly stating that the band can't exist without my dad. While he acknowledged that honoring Eddie through unreleased music might happen someday, he made it clear that commercialization of his father's work is not the goal. His stewardship of Eddie's legacy is focused on dignity, sincerity, and musical greatness, not opportunistic revivals. Though rumors of a tribute project continue to circulate, nothing concrete has emerged. Joe Satriani has mentioned early talks with former band members and collaborators, but so far, no plans have materialized. For now, Wolfgang remains focused on his own musical path with Mammoth WVH, where he writes, records, and performs everything himself. While the future of the Van Halen name may be uncertain, one thing is crystal clear. Wolfgang Van Halen will ensure that anything related to his father's legacy, whether archival or celebratory, will be approached with emotional honesty and musical integrity. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to like, drop a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more untold stories from rock history.